to order the May 20th, 2020 business meeting of the Cincinnati Board of Education. Welcome everyone and request everyone conferencing in to please silence your cell phones and electronic devices. Please, let's cite the pledge together. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic
for
which it
which
stands,
it stands,
one nation, under God,
indivisible,
with
with liberty and justice for all.
for all.
Thank you. Ms. Wagner.
Mrs. Bates. Ms. Bolton. Present. Mrs. Bowers.
Present.
Mr. Lindy.
Here.
Mr. Messer.
Present.
Mr. Morosky.
Here.
President Jones.
Here. Thank you. I just want to first make a comment and apologize to the folks in our public who have been waiting on us. We had a pretty extensive executive session meeting, thus the reason we're late. But we thank you for hanging in there with us. Okay, so moving on, I need a motion to approve the minutes from the business meeting, May 6, 2020, special meeting, May 6, 2020, special meeting, May 11, 2020, business meeting, May 11, 2020.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Is there a second? Second? Okay.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved as presented. Okay, anyone have any kudos? Anyone have any kudos today?
Oh, I do.
Ms. Bolton?
Yes, a quick kudo. I yesterday attended as an audience member, so to speak, the Aspire graduation that took place at the parade and what have you. And it's one of my favorite graduations anyway, but in the rain, under the tent with wonderful music blaring, if you will, on a big old speaker, cars driving up, honking as they came, people waving outside the car windows, and the Aspire folks also say 2 or 3 sentences about each of their graduates, which is quite inspiring. But most particularly, besides the graduates and Raleigh, who does a fantastic job, I want to compliment, if I can, Jerry Roberts for all that he's doing for these graduations, and I want to thank the Aspire staff, who I think almost had 100% show up, and not only did they cheer and wave the signs and do whatever, but they did what every teacher does at the end of any graduation, maybe usually in private, and that is all of them to the music, danced their hearts out in the rain, in front of the tent, thrilled with their kids and thrilled with a job well done. And it was moving, it was beautiful, even in the rain. So hats off to them.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Mr. Morosky, followed by Ms. Bowers.
I think I brought this up maybe in another meeting, but last Thursday, the staff at Hayes Porter and some community members did a parade, and kids were out in their front yards having fun with their families. A lot of folks showed up, support staff, teachers, administrators, all of them. And so kudos to everyone, the Hayes Porter community. I know that the kids in the West End really, really enjoyed seeing everybody.
Thank you. Ms. Bowers?
I just want to reiterate what Board Member Bolton said. I was able to be a virtual attendee to Project Search on Monday and also SCPA on Monday night for their graduation, and it was very, very good. Very excited. Principal Owens was getting soaking wet and without anything covering his head, but he was so pumped up. They had on all their gala. It was beautiful. And I just want to reiterate how, and I make sure I put something in the chat. There was so many positive comments in the chat about the graduations and shout out the people in the chat room. So I thought that it was very inspiring. I will be watching Hughes. I'm going to start, and I'm going to try to get Schroeder too tonight.
Thank you. I just want to add that I have heard, although I did not get to see the virtual because, of course, I've shared with you I don't have internet right now at my house, being repaired today, but I do plan to watch. But I heard lots of positive comments about the graduations that happened on Monday and Tuesday. So kudos to all of our graduates and to all the staff who helped support their celebration. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Bates. Bates there.
I'm here, but I have a weak internet connection. I couldn't pull up board docs. Can somebody read off the retirements for me, please?
Okay. Does anybody have that information handy right in front of you? Give us just a second. And then I think it's in your report. I think I might have it. Retiree, is this, wait a minute. Okay, retirements. I see it. I'll go ahead and read off the retirees. The following employees have made applications for these retirements. So we have Charlene Frank, who is a paraprofessional, Carol Hentz, licensed practical nurse, Patricia McCullum, paraprofessional, and Marlene Waggle, who is a student health assistant. We want to say congratulations to those people for serving with CPS and good luck in your future endeavors. Okay. So we are now at the item on our agenda for hearing the public. Board prides itself on being as transparent and open as possible. With the state's direction to minimize public gatherings, we are convening this video conference call to include opportunity for public comment. Here are the specific instructions for participation in hearing of the public. To speak, you will need to send a request by clicking on the hand icon on your screen. Mac and iPad users are able to access the raise hand icon located on your device. Once the request has been granted by Treasurer Wagner, you will receive a notice on your screen. Click yes to go interactive. If you do not want your video active, please disable the video camera icon. After speaking, you will briefly see the welcome screen again as you transition back to the live stream meeting. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak, and Mrs. Wagner will be our timekeeper. When the buzzer goes off, your 3 minutes are up. Please refrain from discussing any personnel item. Okay. Ms. Wagner, do we have any speakers ready?
Yes, we do. Mr. Paff, you are up. You can begin speaking.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great, thank you. I just wanted to quickly give some remarks. On behalf of the Hyde Park School PTO, I wanted to thank the superintendent for that growth presentation last week. We're happy to have plans in place for modular classrooms in the parking lot so that our students will no longer have to cross the busy street classes each day. The report called for one double classroom unit and one single classroom unit to be utilized. But however, I feel it's best to have 2 of the double classroom units. Our incoming kindergarten enrollment is already surpassed last year's enrollment, so the school is moving forward with plans for 4 kindergarten classes instead of 3 from last year. Unfortunately, If we stay with the 3 modular classrooms, that means most likely our teachers' lounge will have to be converted into a classroom, as was almost done last summer. You may recall last summer we did have to convert the library into a classroom, and that classroom in the library space will remain for next year. So increasing the modular classrooms from 3 to 4 total would give Hyde Park School the space we need and would help preserve the teacher's lounge until an expansion of the building can be completed. Thank you for this opportunity. We'll hopefully see you all more often this summer. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Wagner.
So far, nobody else has asked.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to move on. We'll assume that since nobody has a motion to speak. Okay, Superintendent Mitchell, would you please introduce our first presentation?
Yes, thank you. So every so often we ask Shara Fisher-Jackson, who is the Executive Director and CEO for the Preschool Promise, to come before the board to provide a presentation and give an update as to enrollment as well as the overall functioning of the Preschool Promise and how those dollars are being used to support our young people in private preschool provider centers. And so at this time, I'd like to invite Mrs. Fisher-Jackson to begin her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Mitchell. We have lots to report and update. We'll go ahead and move to the first slide to kind of give you an update on where we are in the early childhood education sphere for community providers. As everyone probably knows, that the governor announced that child care programs could reopen beginning May 31st with very specific mandatory recommended best practices, new health and safety guidelines. Those that are most important are increased hand washing, 35 square feet of space for each preschooler or child, that non-porous dividers be set up, and new reporting requirements for COVID-19 exposure and cases. That came out last Thursday. So many community providers are preparing for that reopen date. What you will see on the right is a snapshot of our numbers of kind of what we knew was the case and the status quo prior to pandemic and what has been happening during the pandemic period. We know that we had 367 3-year-olds that we had targeted and are looking for re-enrollment, and those re-enrollment forms were posted on our website on May 1st. We have 481 children who will really be our targeted focus as 4-year-olds that I'll be talking about later to make sure that they successfully transition to kindergarten. And we also are doing outreach to 192 siblings of our currently enrolled families that we know will be eligible for preschool in the upcoming year. During the pandemic, many of our community providers continued with professional development and quality improvement activities. 60% remained interested. We also have 8 providers who are waiting approval of their step up to quality star rating to high quality of 3 or above. We know that those reviews have been delayed for 6 to 7 months and won't start till late September, October. But there are 8 providers based on their coaching model and our coordination with 4C that we believe as soon as opportunities make themselves available, will be moving to high quality, and they are also potential seats that we may consider for provisional approval that would provide an additional 116 high quality seats. On the next slide, you will see that we've been in regular communication with our providers to say, what do you need for those that are continuing to operate during the pandemic, and what will you need for reopening? Contact with preschoolers and families were mainly through phone calls and through direct mail and email. The support that providers said they needed most in an ongoing basis is reopening supplies, resources to stay connected with their parents and families, and remote learning resources. You will note that comparable to what has been shared over and over again in the educational context, that 69% of our providers reported needing additional digital technology for sites and families. This included not only technologies to keep in touch with parents, but based on the new distancing guidelines and the setups of the classrooms, additional technology in the classrooms, where students who at one time been able to share a single tablet, they now need to have multiples to stay safely separated inside of that classroom. Overall, we had about 59 CPP community providers who were offering pandemic childcare education and programs ongoing. That means that these providers never closed. They've had ongoing and continuing services. You will see on the next slide, in response to the provider survey, the hundreds of calls that we've made in our new cohort model to make sure that we have a personal touch with each provider at least once every 2 weeks, the new and expanded initiatives that we've developed to be responsive to what we've heard not only from providers but from parents as well. The first is an extended learning session to mitigate the learning loss from the mandatory closures. That beginning when programs reopen as early as June 1 through the start of the regular academic year, we would offer tuition assistance for 500 preschoolers. That tuition assistance would be paid based on attendance, not on enrollment, as it was done during the closure period. We set for 500 preschoolers based on input from providers and parents on students that they thought would return, and this encapsulates the number of 4-year-olds that we want to give priority to that opportunity for the extended learning session. Our goal is to get those preschoolers back into the classroom as safely and as soon as possible to make sure that they're ready to transition to kindergarten. We have also been working very diligently to engage parents. Back 1 second. And for those parent engagements, a new partnership with Free Store Food Bank has allowed us to have delivery of food boxes on a weekly basis to provider sites so that parents can pick those boxes up when they come to pick up or drop off their children, or from a trusted and familiar partner, and not have to re-navigate transportation challenges and other things. So we're pleased to have that partnership with direct contactless delivery from Amazon. That will be expanded to go not only to the providers, but to the individual homes of the parents most in need. We're doing some innovative things on our parent Facebook page and social media. So you will see, those of you who have access to the parent Facebook only site, not only are we doing regular information updates, but some inspiring spoken word sessions and some parent testimony sessions and special tips to really build that parent network and engagement, because we know those relationships are the best way to keep our parents connected, engaged, and looking toward enrollment and continuation in CPP. We're upping our direct mail expansion so that not only will parents and preschoolers continue to receive postcards from us and regular cards from us, but general communication through direct mail. And there was a series of webinars that will beginning the second week of June for parents to come together for Q&A and networking as well, based on what area of the footprint that they live. It's a geography-based opt-in for parents to be in specifically designed webinar and Q&A groups to answer any questions they may have about reopening, preschool promise, and ongoing preschool education. On the next slide, you will see the specific support that we've been providing and offering to providers. Our primary concern is to make sure that we don't lose those community providers, given the pandemic and the shifts that we've seen and all of the things that they are having to contend with in this environment. The first thing is to make sure that we can provide PPE and supplies for pandemic providers that are transitioning and those that are reopening. So we have planned to provide PPE supplies for up to 350 preschool classrooms to give them a start and know that they'll be ready at reopening. Doing that as a group rather than individually makes it easier, particularly for family child care providers, to access those resources and be ready. Our staff support funds, as we've talked about before, will be rolling out. So lead teachers in each quality improvement qualified community preschool will have access to those funds to help them plan how they will staff and recruit and retain teachers. We'll be doing promotion and marketing for the available and open seats at those preschools, including some advertisements in the Herald. And our webinar series will continue with operational changes, professional development, and really what the request has been of those providers of peer support and networking, or groups of them to come together in a non-competitive environment, but one that is cooperative. We anticipate when childcare programs reopen, that many will not be able to serve the same number of preschoolers that they had in the past. And if that is the case, we want to make sure that there is a trusted relationship with another community provider that may have the capacity to take those students and begin that education right away. You will then see our new and updates to our communications and digital engagement strategy and our specific campaigns. We have a new weekly series that is from the desk of, where I go live and record it on Facebook and social media to give a general update to our parents, providers, and community. Our enrollment campaign has started. Our kindergarten transition campaign will run June through August to really provide information on enrollment opportunities and transitioning to kindergarten at CPS. And a special thanks to Vera Brooks and her team for providing the collateral information to help us drive that campaign. You'll also see biweekly updates of providers, really to showcase and people to see the face of the community providers who are educating their students, as well as teacher tips and our ongoing Promise Reader series. You'll see some snapshots of the collateral printed material and digital material that really got pushed out related to those campaigns, including the billboards that are throughout the city. In moving forward, in the next slide, you will see that our priorities have really been focused on how we continue to support parents and providers, making sure children are kindergarten ready, maintaining and increasing the enrollment in this environment, how we make sure we minimize the loss of high quality seats and any community providers not being able to survive the economic burden of the shifts, and that we assess and support the ongoing increased cost of quality, which we know is happening. There's economic modeling being done by the CCR&R, by Groundwork Ohio, and by JFS to make sure that we have a good idea of what the new cost is for a community provider to operate. And that is a snapshot of what we've been focusing on in the last month since we kind of gave you an update of where Preschool Promise.
Thank you. Do board members have questions or comments? Ms. Bowers?
Thank you, Board President Jones. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Shara. Thank you for the presentation. Congratulations on the innovative, creative, as we all have had to be with COVID-19, but especially for you pushing toward different ways of trying to engage more parents and giving them information on support socio-emotionally for teachers socio-emotionally, and just inquiring about that. You and I have talked about that before. In addition to congratulations on the collaborative work of you and Vera Brooks on helping with transitioning some of the preschoolers to our CPS schools. And so I would just like to say I think that that's a good start, and I hope to see more of that in the future.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Ms. Bolton?
Yes, thank you. And thanks for the presentation and all that you're doing. It's remarkable, I think. A couple of just comments. A lot of the things that you've had to do for the facilities, whether it's the dividers or whatever, all of that is coming, I think it is, or should be, or whatever, how much that costs. Isn't that would be reasonable to have that come out of the Preschool Promise dollars that are part of the levy and the renewal? So, and then that would be true for CPS as well. But that, I think that's an important thing to say, that those dollars for that levy, for that renewal, are helping get our private providers and the Cincinnati public as well ready for the children returning, and I think that's important. I have an interest, and I couldn't quite tell when you were presenting it because I was confused. Are you anticipating what kind of percentage return of families and students, based upon what your projections would be, or based upon what has been the reality? Do you think you're getting more than 100% numbers or less? Because we have to kind of have an understanding of that ourselves. So you might have some information that would be helpful.
Sure. So I'll respond to a couple of questions. For the adaptations that have to be made for the classroom and the supplies and the non-porous walls and the spacing, We are not certain yet what those expenses may be for all of those changes, nor have we confirmed with all the providers the need for that. We very carefully set out in our budget for the next fiscal year to allow a COVID-19 specific section to be able to address what those concerns are, so that there is not a loss of high quality seats or those that are moving to high quality. So though we don't know the specific number for that, we have some idea, and you are correct in planning for that. In terms of return, in surveying providers and talking to parents, and what's happening with other Ohio preschool initiatives in the state as well, what we did is take the enrollment number that we had, actual attending at the end of February, right, pre-pandemic time. We then reduced that by 35% to say those are the number of students that we anticipated returning for the extended learning session that may begin June 1, or when people decide to open. We have not made strong projections yet for the fall, because the anticipation is we will not know that until we get an idea of who's returning for summer and the number of re-enrollment applications that are coming in that were just posted on May 1st. So I can tell you anecdotally, the reason that we chose to go ahead and post that enrollment and to push it is because of the number of inquiries and calls that we receive from parents and communities that say we intend to still be engaged and we intend to still be involved. The advice that we've given to parents and what we caution them at is Preschool Promise will be here. We will be doing everything to educate your child, and be prepared that that may look like in classroom, it may look like remote, or it may be a combination, right? But we will look for the best educational and safe option in collaboration with CPS as well, to make sure that there's an equitable distribution of how all people have access to those quality preschool seats. So the best estimate I can give you now is we expected extended learning period reduction of 35%, and we will have at the end of June a better projection for the fall, but looked at originally probably 20 to 30.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from District Jackson? Okay, thank you so much again for your presentation, and we're all hanging in there, and thank you all for the dedication of our families. We appreciate that.
Thank you. And we appreciate the support of each CPS board member and Superintendent Mitchell for all of the requests we have for connections to community, our connection with industry professionals for mental health services, the remote resources, and basically the collaboration to say how are we moving through this collectively to go forward. And we hope to continue to be able to share with you the growing number. We hope it'll be growing number, or at least consistent number of preschool families we're able to contact and touch.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you. All righty. So the next presentation is the 5-year forecast and finance update.
Yes, thank you. So let me share my screen. So good morning, everyone. I'm presenting to you today the spring 5-year forecast. But before I get started, I wanted to acknowledge Kevin Ashley, our Director of Financial Reporting Transparency, who's done the lion's share of the work on all the background analysis and input and helping me put together the 5-year forecast. So I just wanted to acknowledge his hard work. This forecast was a unique challenge this year, simply because of the pandemic closure and all the economic changes that are happening rather rapidly, as well as conversion to a new forecasting software. So for some of our newer board members who may not be familiar with this tool, and for our viewing public, I'm going to go into a few slides of basics. So the forecast is a financial tool to measure school district solvency, help us plan future financial opportunities, in other words, levies, and to help assist us with spending decisions into the future. It is on a cash basis versus an accrual basis, which most for-profit entities use. And that just means that we only recognize the revenue and the expense when we actually receive it or pay for it. It is aligned with our fiscal year end, which is June 30, and we present 3 years of actual history by line item, and then the fourth year is a current year that we're in. It's either in November we typically show it as the operating budget, and then in May we just re-estimate what we think we're going to finish the year for, and then we show you 4 years of forecast into the future. So why do we do this forecast? And so it's required by the Ohio Department of Education for all 613 school districts in the state of Ohio. We all use the same format, and its purpose for them is to monitor our solvency and to support public transparency in terms of financial information. And it is filed twice a year, in November and in May. So factors that influence the forecast for every year is number one, the state funding, which we are heavily reliant on. If you recall, our state funding represents about 39% of our revenues in the general fund. And the state biennium budget will actually have 3 different budgets in this 5-year cycle. And that we were frozen, the fiscal year 20 revenues were frozen at last year's levels, except when the pandemic closure hit and they notified us they were actually cutting this year's funding. So we'll get into that in just a second. But the state revenue is frozen at 47.9%, which is our state share. Comparatively speaking, Columbus is at 59.2, Akron is at 72.4, even Dayton's at 87.7. And so we are considered a wealthy district, which just means that our local property taxers bear the brunt of our funding the general fund revenue. The formula also froze us at a cap. So they have a limit on how fast we can grow for enrollment. Last year, we lost about $5 million because we were capped by the formula in terms of our enrollment growth. Now, they did supplement it with a $1 million average growth calculation, but that doesn't cover the $5 million that we lost. It also has a significant portion is the pass-through funding for tuition. Community schools represents about $48 million, and the voucher program about $33 million. That's just deducted right off the top. And the reason I'm putting that out is because our state funding was cut, the charter schools weren't cut at the same rate, and the vouchers weren't cut at all this year, so that squeezes the available cash that we have to fund our own things. And so that's pretty significant. It just makes that cut feel deeper. And typically in the 5-year forecast, we use anywhere from 3 to 5% inflation rates, depending on the line item, supplies versus textbooks versus transportation. But this year, the pandemic closure kind of changed everything for us. 2 other items to note that make this forecast challenging is the introduction of the Student Wellness Fund. So if you recall, we received $8 million this year, and I believe it's $12 million next year. But they're requiring us to put that money into a separate fund instead of the general fund. And so when we remove expenses from those line items, it kind of messes with the historical trends. And so you have to kind of consider that as an anomaly rather than a trend. It's hard to keep track of. And then eventually when that fund goes away, those expenses will have to come back to the general fund, or we just stop doing those. And we have heard rumors, nothing formal yet, that they were planning to cut the student wellness money for next year. And if I hear anything formal, I'll certainly share it with the board and the public. Now, the second fund was just released this week, the number of CARES Act, and it's open in the CCIP. We have to actually apply, but we are intended to get about $23 million from Title I, and right off the top, $5.5 million goes to the auxiliary schools, non-public schools in our district. So that leaves 18 for us to use over a 2-year period. So that the closing period is September 30, 2022. The leadership team and I are preparing and creating that budget on how best to use that. And I'll show you in the forecast where I have that noted. It also will have an impact on the historical trends. So these big, large anomalies of expenses that move out of the general fund into another fund and then come back makes it difficult. Another factor influencing this forecast is we have 2 renewals on the books this year, or for this forecast. The first one being this November 2020, which we are planning the $48 million renewal. That is to support the expansion of preschool. $15 million of that is a set aside, and the rest is for strategic operations. And then in 2022, November 22, we will be putting on the $51.5 million levy will be on that ballot. And so you'll see that in the forecast as well. Now I noticed you see a big pink stripe through 24, and that's because the last renewal we extended to 10 years, so it's no longer a 5-year cycle, and we need to update this slide, but I really like it. So these are just some details on the levy. $48 million was first enacted in 2016. The funds actually run out in December of 2021, which impacts our fiscal year of 2022. And then the renewal is intended to be on for November 2020 if the board decides to move forward. Then the other levy that's on the ballot was first enacted in 2008, so this will be the third renewal of that levy. And so it's scheduled to be on the ballot on November 2022. And so you'll see that in the fiscal year 24 column. Okay, so the bottom line in this forecast is to maintain a positive cash until fiscal year 20. And the way to make that happen, we had to make some significant changes. So recognizing the state funding that was reduced, $8.7 million in fiscal year 20, and then another about 3% is what we're hearing in fiscal year 21, but nothing formal. They told us they would let us know in October for fiscal year 21. And then we also put in an estimate for property tax revenues, since we're hearing in the county that the revenue collections are down. So we put about a 2% reduction in fiscal year 21, and then a return in fiscal year 22 and 23 to more normal collections. So on the expense side, we kept every line item flat, so no growth, except for a few exceptions. The first one being in the salary line item, I only let it grow by step increases, so no new FTEs, no COLAs, no raises or anything like that, just simply step increases that are already in the bargaining agreements. Then in fiscal year 21, we had fiscal year. I'm sorry, was there a question?
Yeah, I don't know if it's just my computer or whatever, but I no longer have the PowerPoint on my screen. Is it just mine?
I don't know. Do other board members see it?
There you go. Now I
have
do.
it. I have it.
I got it.
Okay.
I have it now.
Okay. Super. Okay, so in transportation, fiscal year 20, we were able to save about $3.5 million because we stopped transporting children when we closed. But in fiscal year 21, we returned that transportation cost to its normal rate. And then there was an increase to cover for the Healthy Start Times change in the routing system. We also allowed the textbook adoption to go up as the board approved the math textbook adoption for next year. It was somewhere between $4 and $5 million. And then we added the new devices to support remote learning. And so that, because we know that will be part of our new normal. I also included an estimate to help fund the enrollment growth on a financing tool called COPS, the Certificate of Participation. And so that represents about $2.5 million, and I'll show you where that is in the forecast as well. And then in fiscal year 21, I have a really big negative in the other column. That's the CARES Act. So we'll take expenses out of those different line items and move them over to the CARES Act fund. But since we haven't finished that budget and gotten approval for it yet, I just show it as one big line item. So moving to the current year, just to show you the difference between the November and the May forecast and revenues, you can see that it's basically the same. The difference is really $6 billion. And so those of you who received an advanced copy of this PowerPoint last night, that yellow box is $6 billion. It was a typo in that. I fixed it this morning, so just for you. So in November, we thought we'd finish the year at $610 million. And in May, we're about $604 million. The difference being our property tax collections were higher because valuations were up, but then it offset by the decrease in state funding. And there was a correction in the CRA line. In the November forecast, they mistakenly included the FCC payment as an annual payment instead of a one-time thing. And so we fixed that with this forecast. Moving over to the expenditure side of the house, we had a budget that was adopted in June of last year for this year of $657 million. In November, we thought we forecasted $622 million, and we think we're going to finish the year at $623 million. So we're still reducing this year's expenses by about $30 million due to all the closings and the savings. And so most of those areas were in personal services. That was actually an increase because of the COLA that we gave mid-year. And then the other savings were in the purchase services, which is where you would see the transportation and other contracts that we will not finish out because we're closed and not getting the services anymore. We did see an increase in capital outlay, and that was the purchase of the 2 buildings. That was not in the original November forecast. So moving on to the forecast moving forward, you can see that the revenues dip a little bit and then they move up a little. So this is a stacked bar that shows you the different funding sources. The bottom part being the local property taxes, and the state is the purple. And then I just showed you the difference between the pilot and the TIF payments and some of the other funding sources. The stars recognize the year in which the levy renewals are on the forecast. So once again, we assumed state cuts for 20. Well, we know they're having in 20, those are real. And then we assumed fiscal year 21. In fiscal year 22, which starts a new biennium budget, we're hoping the Patterson formula will come into play and that the cap will be removed, so our state revenue should be going up. And then if property taxes are reduced in 21 and a little bit in 22, but then they'll return to normal in 23. We're showing that same view on the expenditure side. You can see that it's basically flat, and the only growth that's allowed are the step increases, except for in fiscal year 21, the increases that I already talked about, transportation, textbooks. And the significance of this here is that fiscal year 21 is forecasted to be about $625 million budget compared to the current year, which is 657. So that's already a $33 million cut into our current spending pattern had we finished the year out the way the budget intended. And just to put that in perspective, that's about 34 teachers, $33 million. Around 34 teachers. So just to keep that, I'm not suggesting that we're going to cut 34 teachers. I'm just saying, just to kind of put that $33 million in perspective, that's what it would feel like. And then, so in fiscal year 21, if you recall in one of my earlier presentations, the strategic plan initiatives that were called for to happen in fiscal year 21, the scope of that year was about $65 million in costs. And so added on to our current level of spending, it would produce a budget of $700 million. So $700 million to down to 625 is a very painful decision to make. We simply cannot afford to keep adding on, given the revenues, and we can't maintain the same level of programming and the same level of staffing that we have right now. It's sad state of affairs, and we're going to have some tough decisions to make moving forward. I think that's what I wanted to say there. So I always add this slide because, let me flip back just one second. So that big orange bar at the top represents all the transfers that go from the general fund into a different fund. And it's such a nebulous thing. I try to give a little bit more detail and edification to that. So that's what this slide does. So the general fund transfers about $16 million into the debt fund so that we can pay our principal and interest. Most of the revenues for the debt fund come from the bond levies, and that gets booked right into the fund, is Fund 2, so the debt fund. But the general fund has to support that because we don't collect enough to pay all of that debt. Also, the little pink line there is $3.2 million that we transfer from the general fund into a fund that's specifically set aside to maintain the buildings from the facility master plan. That's a requirement by the OSFC when we entered that plan. And then the big green block is the school-wide pool transfer, and I'll go into that in more detail in just a second. But we have this little purple line at the top, and it's where I'm publicly recognizing what I call a preschool transfer, but it's our version of the use of the tuition assistance dollars. So unlike the private providers, we receive the revenues from the levy, and we pay our teachers in salaries and the NAP aides in those classrooms, the preschool classrooms. But the tuition assistance dollars are assigned to the students based on their income and the rating of the center and whether they're AM or PM, and there are other funding sources. And so it's a monthly calculation. It doesn't really have to hit our books because we've already recognized that expense in salaries, but it's a way to publicly recognize that tuition assistance calculation. Hope that makes sense. So moving into the school-wide pool transfer. So this was enacted in No Child Left Behind. And so what it allows us to do is to commingle our general fund with other federal funds. The benefit of that is that school principal, and it's for qualifying Title I schools. So I think all but 7 or 8 of our schools are in Title I. What that allows a principal to do is just manage one budget to support the needs of those students. And there's a plan, a title plan that they have to follow where they look at their test assessments and make decisions about where to invest their money to help support academic growth. When in the period of the time that we would participate in the school-wide pool, we left less dollars unspent at the end of the year, because when you have to figure out 3 different fundings and this particular teacher can only serve these particular kids because of her funding source, it makes it harder to spend that money efficiently. We're still following all levels of compliance for every grant. Every fund has its own rules about how it enters the fund. And then for every dollar that we spend out of the fund, that same proportion goes back to the original sending fund. So for example, the general fund makes up 92% of that fund. So for every dollar, 92 cents gets charged back to the general fund. So this is so hard for people to see because it's all in one line in the forecast. What I've shown you in that bottom grid is what our spend would be like had we not been in the pool. So in the general fund forecast, I'm showing salary and benefits to equal 177.7 million, but we're really spending 361.4 out of the general fund on salaries and benefits because we're transferring that money into the pool. The top chart on the left shows you that most of the money that's in the pool is spent on personnel, which we would expect because our schools are mostly teachers that support students. So here's a summary of the forecast, the real bottom line, and the impact that it has to our cash balance. So this year, we started the year with $126 million in cash. We're going to end the year with 106. You add the revenues in to take out the expenses, despite our budget being at $657 million. And then, so that ending cash balance carries over to as beginning cash balance of the next year. We have our anticipated revenues are at 591.7, and revenue or expenditures, I'm sorry, it's 625. So that we start dipping into our cash balance. But because we're holding our expenses flat and not allowing them to grow with inflation, so if we do experience inflation, we're going to have to reduce other spending areas, or we're going to hit a deficit too early, and we would end up having to go back to the public for money or make severe cuts. And so we have to be very careful about how we plan our spending over the next 2 years during this forecast. This is just a visual. I'm a visual learner, and I think in pictures. So here, this is a visual of what I've just shown you. So the blue line shows you the November forecast and how we would have hit a deficit in the fiscal year 23 school year, given those spending patterns. But because in the May forecast we're flattening out that spend, we still hit it in 23, but it's a smaller hit. And so it just shows you that as we control our spending, the differences in the cash balances. So this forecast influences our operations, our budget, general fund operating budget. And so typically in November, we set the budget target so that when we start our budget cycle, we know what our target is going to be. But because of the pandemic and all the recent changes, we are using the May forecast to set the budget target, like I said, at $625 million in order to maintain those cash balances going forward. And so just showing you that, comparing it to the adopted budget of 657, which already feels like a big cut to us, at 33 million, even with the CARES Act money, and that the additional scope of the plan was going to add 65 million to that. So what's our process now to determine our new normals? There's, as the superintendent said before, there's teams that are working on what that normal is going to look like. We have a budget work session the leadership team does on Tuesday. We plan to come to the board with the 90-day appropriation, as we agreed to a couple board meetings ago on June 22nd, buy us time to do our public engagement, finalize what the real normal budget looks like, and then present it to the board for approval by September 30th. So with that, I'll pause, and I'm sure there'll be questions. I'll be happy to answer any.
Board members, questions or comments? I can't see any hands, so if there are, just.
I'll stop sharing the screen. Maybe that's better. Is that better?
Yes. Any questions or comments? Mr. Lindy?
Yeah, first I want to say, Jen, this has just been a very helpful presentation. I want to say thank you. The only question I had was, I wanted to confirm that I was right, that each year we will still adopt a spending budget that would basically try to fill out the details on how we plan to stay in line with the overall structure that you're describing. And that within that would fall the 90-day spending plan we talked about, and then also the rest of the year spending plan for FY21. Is that accurate?
Yes, so we're required by state law to appropriate funds annually at the fund level. And I have to submit that to Hamilton County Budget Commission in order for me to even start writing checks. And so Ohio Revised Code also will not allow me to operate in a cash deficit. So in this forecast, if the state sees us have a deficit too soon, they'll come down, have some meetings about what are you going to do to close this gap. And if you get too far down the line, you start failing levies and you get really into bad news, then they'll adopt an organization to help the board make decisions on spending. It's not fun, but you're right. It's an annual process.
That's great. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Other questions or comments, Ms. Bolton?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Jan. Appreciate the efforts of everyone. A couple things. You mentioned something about the number of teachers, and then, of course, said that's not what you're suggesting, but there was a number that you used. I
may have misspoke. It's 33 million would equal 344 teachers.
Thank you.
I apologize.
Yeah.
I knew that didn't sound right when I said it, but I couldn't find my notes.
I was going to say I'm leaving retirement and going to start teaching again. If I get $1 million, that would be great. Yeah.
I have so many numbers running around my brain. It's just hard to remember. Yep.
Not a problem. And do you think there is any possibility that the cap in the new biennial we could possibly lobby to get that off?
There's a lot of us that are, Columbus and I are, Cincinnati are particularly hurt by the cap. So there's efforts that are pushing in that direction, but there's not a whole lot of us in that position. So we're going to need help.
Well, if I could continue, Madam President, the reference to normal numbers in transportation, I might want to explain that a little bit more, because as our public knows, and we all know, we couldn't afford our normal numbers. And with the new arrangements that exist, it's possible that transportation will be up even more unless somehow we cut. Well, one of the ways is to cut the week, frankly, or the days of instruction or what have you. But maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when you do forecasting modeling, it actually looks at your prior year history of spend and then projects that trends are going to continue. So if you have an anomaly where we cut $3.5 million out of this year, the system's going to think that anomaly may continue. So what we had to do is renormalize at around $45 million, I believe, as to what our operations would have been last year, and then they added on the healthy start times. And quite frankly, we don't know what transportation is going to look like, because if we have to do social distancing rules on the bus, that's going to create a problem. We can't have more buses because there aren't enough drivers in the country to help us. So we're going to have to get really creative on how to make that happen.
Yeah, it's very possible that it'll be that tail that wags the dog again, which we never like to have, but where the transportation issues might help us determine the instructional issues that we have. Just a last thing, and I'm just, even though I'm introducing the resolution about pooling, I think today, I want to be that same one note. I really think in the new world, we have to really think about whether pooling is good under these circumstances, as it has been over the last several years since we've been allowed. How much decentralization, how much discretion, how much accountability. I just think it would be a good thing in the new norm to discuss yet again the pooling piece. And finally, on school budgets, I know we say we spend so much money on teachers. I will also say that when you look at each school budget, more than any other district, I think we have the most support staff in each one of those but school budgets too, far more than anybody else that I can imagine. Fortunately so, everybody's valuable and needed, but the school budgets really are very revelatory as to how we are supporting our students and our staff in each of those buildings. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Moravsky. Go ahead, Ms. Wagner.
I was just going to say, I forgot to mention that the forecast is part of the treasurer's report, so I'm submitting it for approval. When you vote on the treasurer's report, you'll be approving this forecast for me to file with the state.
Thank you. Moravsky.
Thank you, President Jones. A couple things. One thing I'd just like to put a pin in and highlight for the public's edification is to highlight Treasurer Wagner's point that while we were asked to take an $8.7 million hit these past couple months and looking at $30+ million less to budget next year, the state made no changes to the voucher or charter program, which means we are, correct me if I'm wrong, Treasurer Wagner, we are still writing checks as a pass-through for charters and vouchers, which is less money for our students. Is that correct?
Yeah, so they are cutting the charter, or they told us they're cutting the charter school, just not as deeply as they're cutting us. So I think what Aaron Roush told us was charters would cut about 80% of what we're being cut, but it's all based on relative wealth across the districts. The vouchers aren't being cut this year because their money's already been paid out. So they say they don't want to take money back, but they're asking the smaller school districts, like the district that Brittany Marks went to, she has to pay money back to the state because her cut was deeper than what's left over for them to pay her. It just doesn't seem fair. But yes, you're right. It makes our available cash smaller to educate the students that we have.
I appreciate that. And I think it's an important message to be repeated. Of course, it was good that the state froze the voucher proliferation. Ideally, when they look at passing bills to continue changes they made, that would be one of those. But that kind of leads into my next question with the voucher freeze. And I know this was an assignment a while ago, so I don't expect all the magic answers. But it was alluded to in the presentation. I'm wondering, A, if there are any more solid-ish numbers about projected enrollment, or just that we assume it will be higher. Because the other thing that, again, for the edification of the public, and also I would like to know where our heads are at with the voucher freeze and with the economy taking a downturn. I think it is logical to assume that our enrollment we know it's going to be up because people are choosing us. We are a district of destination, to quote superintendent. But I feel like it's reasonable to assume it's going to be up even more than we initially thought. Does that seem accurate, or have we thought any more about that? Do we have any projections?
We really don't yet, because we don't really know for sure what's going to happen. We suspect that there'll be families out there that won't be able to afford their share of the tuition and will return back to public education. We suspect that some schools may not survive this economic downturn because of their cash reserves aren't as large as ours, right? And so we're preparing for them to come back, which makes life a little bit harder because we have to hire more teachers. And so what else are we not going to spend? Hire those teachers, educate those children. But we don't know for sure what's going to happen. So we don't have any real
Appreciate
projections
it.
yet. Mhm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other question. I do want to make a final comment that I think, thank you again, Treasurer Wagner. Me as somebody who is not a numbers person, but you always make it a little easier for me to absorb the numbers. But I think it's very fluid and very to understand the direction that we're headed. And I think the one slide that really impacts me most is the very last one, where we actually see that trend. And so I number one, appreciate having this information. It's very, but number two, it makes a reality of having to make some hard decisions and really putting our money, and deciding priority-wise what's going to work for this district. And so it's been really helpful for me through this budget hearing process to really see all the pieces of the information and trying to think about what our situation is going to be for the district over the next few years. So I appreciate the attention that you and the
Well, we certainly make a great team, and thank you for your comments. We appreciate that.
Okay. All right. So if we're ready to move on, we actually don't have any board matters issues or subjects today. So we're going to move on to the presentation of the resolutions. Ms. Bolton, you are actually presenting both of the resolutions. So you can start with the first resolution.
Okay, thank you. I would like to present for passage a resolution to amend the transfer of funds to the school-wide pooling fund approved in July 25th, 2019 from the general fund, Title I, Title IIA for fiscal year 2019 to 20. I so move and hope for approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Morosky, thanks. Any discussion? Ms. Wagner, please call roll.
Mrs. Bates? Are you on?
She's not.
on.
She left.
Okay. Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Aye.
Mr. Messer? Oh, he left. Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
President Jones?
Yes. Thank you.
Miss Wagner, I am on.
Oh, I thought you were.
Yeah,
So,
I'm an I.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
I thought
She really is remote.
Yeah. Hey, now I have a feeling of what's going on with our kids who don't have internet.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bolton, second resolution.
Yes, for the second resolution, I'm introducing is for the reappointing of audit committee members Jim Crossett and Dan Holthouse. I move and hope for approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second?
Thanks. Any discussion? Wagner, please call roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Lindy?
Aye. Sorry.
Okay. Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
President Jones?
Yes. Thank you. All righty. Superintendent Mitchell, do you have a report?
I do have a very short report to highlight some academic achievement of our students, and I believe I have a quick PowerPoint. Thank you. All right. So today I want to highlight academic achievement of our young people. Next slide, please. Thank you. And I just wanted to express that we have not left our commitment to our students' success despite our buildings being closed. The next slide, please. Next one, please. So 3 key messages are centered around career preparedness, academic success, and putting our students first. And you'll see I have some very exciting news to express in terms of our academic support of our kids. So you will be happy to know that 11 students from Walnut Hills High School earned a perfect score of a 36 on the ACT exam. So that's really quite amazing, as you consider that less than 0.5% of all test takers earned this top score. So to put this even in more perspective, 4,880 out of nearly 1.8 million students who took the ACT in 2019 earned a perfect score. So this is a quite remarkable feat for our young people, and we're really happy and excited for them and their families. Another 22 Walnut Hills students were just 1 point shy of a perfect score, and they received 36. The ACT is given in the following test areas: English, math, reading, and science. And so again, the composite score is an average of all 4 tests. And so we want to congratulate these students and their families for a job well done. So very exciting. I also want to highlight DECA, which is the Distributive Education Club of America. It is dedicated to helping young adults become career and college ready. And this is a program that we have at Withrow University High School. And as a matter of fact, Withrow's program is the largest DECA chapter in the state of Ohio with 435 members. And that club is operated by Hope Johnson Gordon at Withrow University. So congratulations to them for their DECA program. Next, you'll see that hopefully you have seen yard signs going up and billboards across Cincinnati highlighting our graduates. So legends in the making are billboards that are across the city. And then we have at the Ed Center, as well as our students at their homes, have personalized yard signs highlighting their school that they're graduating from this year. So we're very excited and very happy for them. And then here are some pictures from the class of 2020 graduation car parade for SCPA. So you can see it was pouring, raining, but people were out in full support. You can see there's a little Mini Cooper. It looks like it's a convertible with a mask on the front of it. So the kids were very creative, as well as the staff members and families are all out cheering them on. There were a couple of party buses that came through. So it was a very, very festive time for our young people. We're really it's unfortunate that we weren't able to do something more formal like what they're traditionally used to, but this was a positive celebration, and the graduation parades will continue for the next several weeks. And that concludes my report in addition to the superintendent's recommendation.
Thank you, Superintendent. Do I have a motion to approve the superintendent's revised recommendations of the recommendation of the superintendent? Thank you.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. Okay, any discussion? Yes, Ms. Bowers. Ms. Bowers? Oh, Ms. Bowers.
I was second. I'm sorry. I was trying to second.
If I could, just a quick one on the superintendent's recommendations on pages 4 and I think on 6. We are, at least the way I read it, and I may be reading it wrong, we are submitting contracts for some extracurricular or athletic programs, like girls basketball, or I don't have it right in front of me. What is going to be our policy about that, since we have no knowledge necessarily as to where our athletic programs are going to actually be or not be? Is it to let the contract and not yet pay, or just want some guidance on that? It appears in a couple of pages, 4 and 6, and it seems to be mostly about athletics.
Yes. So I'm going to ask Assistant Superintendent Shauna Murphy to be able to respond.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning. Get my camera together. Yes, we are trying to fulfill contracts from this past season that were completed, and then the upcoming spring at a portion of what the original contract was slated to be.
So those are paying up from the previous year. They're not paid forward. They are for this. Okay, that makes sense. And then, did we make a determination about if indeed the activities occurred or not? It looks like
correct. Yes. So
okay.
for the spring, it was about the planning that went in prior to COVID-19 starting.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Morosky.
Thank you, President Jones. I just wanted to congratulate the team on our work, the graduations. From what I've seen, what has occurred has been great. And I know, this is not ideal and it's difficult, and I certainly understand the consternation and disappointment and anger in some cases from parents, but this was absolutely the right decision. I supported it, and I still do 100%. And I'm happy to see people making the best out of an otherwise kind of, lousy situation. So kudos to you all for considering all the angles and putting our student safety first, but also providing an opportunity for people to have some fun with it. So well done.
Yes. Well done. And then my final comment is I'm in full agreement with Mr. Morosky, and I knew that those students would come through and be happy about their graduation. They decorated their cars, so they celebrated. These are resilient people. We need to learn from them. So thank you so much for making that happen. Okay, so we're ready for roll call. Ms. Wagner, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
President Jones?
Yes, thank you. All right, do I have a motion to approve the report of the treasurer?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Wagner, please call roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
President Jones?
Yes, thank you. Okay, any inquiries and updates?
Yes, I have an update or clarification, President Jones, I'm sorry, regarding the resolution conferring diplomas to our 2019-2020 graduates. My vote last week was nay, and I want to clarify that I was not in any form denying conferring the diplomas. It was really some of the language that was used in there I kind of felt was not as actually accurate, but I definitely am in agreement to conferring diplomas, as I too have a graduate myself that I'm trying to transition to the next place. So I wanted to clarify that I was not naying the conferring of diplomas.
Thank you, Ms. Bowers. And congratulations to Alvin. I've been watching the Facebook post. He looks excited.
He's very excited. Thank you. He's very excited, and we are too.
Okay. Any other inquiries and updates? I just wanted to know, no elaboration on this, but we haven't had any board matters. I just wanted the board to know that I am working with the superintendent to align some of those subject priorities, the topics and things that we have been talked about. As we said, we needed to make sure that we're addressing some aspects of it. So just so you know, starting in the first board meeting in June, I think we have lined up plenty of subject matters that we need to discuss. So just to let you know, that we didn't forget, we're just trying to align where administration is headed to where the board's priorities are. Okay. Anything else? Inquiries and updates? Any assignments? Okay. Well,
I have one. No, I have an assignment.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Hold on, Mike. Ms. Bolton was first. We got you next.
Okay.
Yeah, very quickly for the treasurer, and she'll understand, I think, what I'm trying to say, and I'll be unclear about it, but for the board's benefit, it would also be good to be able to see some of those dollars, some of those revenue pieces, or explain things that are not necessarily general fund. Doesn't require a full presentation, but I do think some sort of a memo so that the board members know some of that other money, but also what that other money might be covering and some of the priorities that they may have and are worried about. And then perhaps this is an assignment. I know that there are people within our dental network, this is for the superintendent, that are interested in being somehow part of the planning process, whatever that may be. And I'm thinking in terms of some of these other health networks that might be interested in gathering. So just to contemplate how they might be directly involved, especially the ones that are already involved with us in our district. And for President Jones, because I think it's your kind of responsibility to check into this. There's a group of people that, and I've reported a number of times in the last year, that are kind of the green and outdoor education and environmental education groups that have formed a network. And they're interested in not only submitting kind of a report and how they can help us in this coming year, but also perhaps making a presentation, or at least knowing how they can be part of the public presentation if they can string their several people that want to speak back to back to back as early as maybe the June 1st. They've got some great ideas about how they can help us meet our goals, and I just wanted to make sure that the president was aware of that.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to comment on the second assignment to superintendent. We did. I think there was, if I'm speaking correctly about this, I received that there was an email or something of requests from the folks in the dental area, yes. And I directed that to the community concerns log, asking the superintendent for the superintendent's follow-up on that. So it's already been directed there. So just so you know that. And then the third one that you gave to me, I just want to be clear. I would support doing that, talking to the group about the outdoor education, but I'm reminded of a period of time ago when the board advised me not to directly schedule people for presentations. So, and if that's what you want me to do, that's fine, but I think that might, I would refer that to committee, and maybe the chair of that committee can get it ready and planned out or whatever. I just don't want to do it directly because I was told that we probably shouldn't do that.
That's reasonable. Would we suggest then, is it the kind of the will of the board that those folks that would like, anybody can submit a written report, but if they wanted to really speak to the board as early as June 1st, to share what they've been working on and some of their suggestions. Maybe that they could string their, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, and 3 minutes together so that they could. Does that work?
Of the public. Is that what
Yes.
you're speaking here?
Uh-huh.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. And
So-
so, go ahead, Ms. Bolton. You were gonna say
So,
something?
yeah, I know that they've been working on a report and they would like the, superintendent and the board to see it and the treasurer as well. So with that's a done deal, but maybe the best for them to have an opportunity to present virtually would be on maybe June 1st. And maybe if we can put their presentation, the presenters back to back so that we get a little bit of the comprehensive. I think that it would still be within our protocol to do that.
I don't know that in hearing of the public have we allowed
Yes.
presentations? Okay, that's going to take a little technical work, so it might not be June 1st, but what I'm saying is we can look at it and try to work technical aspects of it, and so it would probably be no more than 5 because that's the protocol.
Right.
5 people. Okay, so we'll work on it. So why don't you, where's the information about who the contacts are?
I think it's the Green Umbrella folks are facilitating it, so we can reach out to them, and I can do that, and we can all do that, the tech people and whoever. But I'll send that name along. But it's the Green Umbrella folks.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other assignments, Mr. Morosky?
I just had 2. As we look to beginning of next school year, for the administration to look into any issues with Schoology that may have happened at the end of the year. I know it wasn't, and I don't put this fault on us or Schoology, quite frankly, but I don't know that Schoology was built for the mass amount of use it was getting. And once you hear a certain amount of complaints, we all have our own barometer for that. But it's like of assignments missing, I felt it was pertinent to just pass that along. So kind of open-ended assignment, but specifically, I've heard of assignments gone missing. So that would be one thing to maybe check out if that's happening, and if so, what we could do to abet that. Of course, hopefully next year there will be less need to have everything done, through there. So my second one is to the superintendent and general counsel and whoever, as we discussed in a public meeting a little while ago, as there's likely new policies we need, and if there is a need for the policy committee to meet, even only for 15 minutes, to hear about new policies. We are more than happy to do that, not to speak for Ms. Bowers and Mr. Messer, but just let us know, and we're on it.
Yes. Just I don't know, the superintendent, if you just wanted to update our conversation about the leadership looking at the policy situation, because you did mention that to me.
Yes. So we do, there's a spreadsheet about 15 to 20. So if it's okay with Board Member Borowski as the chair of that committee, I will ask Dan Hoying to reach out to you. I think that at least a 15-minute conversation would be good just to see what those policies are so that we're ready for next school year.
Awesome. Perfect. We'll do that, and then we'll set a date to meet, and then great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, any other assignments? Wonderful. We made good time. Having no other business before us, I declare this meeting adjourned. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.